How's it going, everyone? My name's Divine, and these are your early game tips and tricks for Palworld. So for your first tip is stat allocation. It's good to know beforehand what each of these stats do so you can make informed decisions while leveling up. One thing to note is that when you do progress further into the game, you will be able to respec your stats, but it does take a while to get to that point in game, so be aware. Alright, so first you have the HP, which is your base health, which you can increase with items as well as stat points. Next up is stamina, and this is how much you can run, swim, or climb in game. Next is attack, and that's the amount of damage that you actually do in game. Next up is going to be defense, and that is the amount of damage decreased by how much defense you have. And a good thing to note about this stat is that you cannot put points into it. Then you have work speed, and that's the speed at which you do tasks around your base, whether that is mining, crafting, any of those sorts of items. And then lastly, we have weight, and that's how much weight you can actually hold on your person. So while you're traveling with all those logs or rocks or ore, this is a good thing to be aware of as well. Now, while I don't want to give you specifics of what you should use for stats while you're putting in your early game points, I will say that there are a couple that are more beneficial than others. Things like weight and HP and stamina, I feel like are a little bit more beneficial than the others from what I've seen early game. Alright, so tip number 2 is going to be about the PAL spheres. Now these are what is used to capture your pals, similar to Pokeballs in Pokemon. One thing to note is that early on they can be kind of a limited resource and a little hard to craft, so when you do throw them, they are a one-time use, so make sure you are trying to be as accurate as possible, and also ensuring that your pals that you're trying to get are, wounded and kind of down on health, because that makes them easier to capture. So just having this in the back of your head can really help. Alright, so the next tip is to be mindful at the earliest stages of the game, and that is when you're choosing a location for your base. You want to make sure you find a good location for that base that has a lot of good flat zones. Now there's a lot of clipping in this game, and even small hills that you can build under technically can actually cause a lot of headaches, whether you're not able to access that item or you can't actually build on top of it. Do note that you can put workbenches outside of your zone and have access to them, but any pals that are working on your base will no longer have the ability to work on those workbenches. So just be aware, find a good flat area that you can build out your base nicely, and that you do have some access to some resources as well, like trees and rocks, and even maybe some ore as well, which can be a great deal of value. Alright, so our next tip, while we're in the base building aspect of things, being mindful of those clipping, I wanted to talk about when you put down benches next to each other. So as you can see, I'm able to put this bench down next to this other bench very, very closely. And I have had some issues early on where you can build off of both benches, but then sometimes it doesn't actually allow you to take the item that you've built off that bench. And I did try to record this, but I wasn't able to, so your mileage might vary, but it's just something to be aware of. So leave a little bit of room in between your benches, and I think you won't have any kind of headache like I have seen in the past. So while we're on the topic of base building still, let's talk about pals working at your base. Now, it might be a little confusing at first, but pals can only do a limited tasks on your base, so you want to make sure that you're checking out what skills they're good at prior to putting them to work on your base. Now, going into further detail, you will see that pals do have a passive skill which can actually help or hurt their abilities as well. Things like bottomless stomach can put a strain on your base's food supply early game, so those are some traits that you might want to try to avoid. Also note that when mousing over your pals, you will see work speed right under their attack and defense, and that is how fast they can actually do tasks. So you might actually find that one pal has a higher work speed, maybe like 70 over a 30, so that's another indicator of who you might want to choose over another. And another good rule of thumb is to find pals that are very specific in the tasks that they can do with a limited amount of abilities. So if you want a miner, make sure that they don't do things like farming, watering, and all that. They have maybe 2 or 3 different skills that they're very good at. That way you don't have them wandering off and doing other tasks that you originally didn't really want them to do in the first place. Now, pals at your base are great and they can help you do a lot of things, but did you know you can have extra workers? And that's actually taking the pals from your party and you have the ability to just throw them at whatever you need them to work on, and they will work on that task as long as they have the ability to do so, and that you are within the base's surroundings. So you cannot leave the circumference of the actual base, otherwise your pal will actually leave and stop doing that task that you have them doing. Alright, so for our next tip, while you're out and exploring and capturing new pals, the game doesn't really state this, but if your party isn't full and you capture a new pal, it adds that pal to your party. But what happens when the party is full? Well, it simply just adds that pal to your pal's storage chest, which is perfect because that means you can have as many pal spheres and as much ammo out there so you can go on a giant collecting spree and not have to worry about, trafficking your pals back to your storage box each time you gather a new pal. They're automatically thrown back there, so just be mindful of this. Store up a bunch of stuff, gear, go explore, capture tons of pals, and this is just something to be mindful early on. Alright, since you're going to be out and about capturing pals anyways, my next tip is to make sure that you're capturing 10 of each type of pal. Now, why are you doing this? This is because you're actually getting bonus experience up to 10 of the same type of pal. And you'll see in that bottom right, the capture success and 7 out of 10 on that chickpea. And it's just a very, very quick way to level. So I'm going to do a guide a little bit later about this and probably have a little bit more detail, but you can go from about level 1 to 15 in probably about an hour doing this method. And even at the higher levels, this is a very easy way to get easy experience and levels so that you can level up your PAL box and your base. Alright, since we're talking about bases again, what I wanted to mention is sometimes you'll notice that your pal's pathing isn't the greatest. As you can see here, they're sitting on top of the tree and they're not really doing much other than getting hungry, and they can't even do the work. So one method of actually correcting this is to go to your pal box, move that type of pal into the storage, and then right back out. And this will actually force them to spawn right in front of you and actually go back to work or get more hunger, as you can see here. So just a quick tip, not every time have I seen pals do this, but when they do, it's just a quick and easy way to correct it. Alright, so another helpful early on tip is if you are struggling to fight pals or different bosses or raid bosses, wait until nighttime and you will find these creatures called daydrums, and you can see them on my screen. They're following me around. But one of the great things about getting this pal is once you get it, you have the ability to unlock a necklace within the technology tree. Once you build that necklace, these daydrums can stay out with you. And if you have a full party of them, you can have all 5 of them out with you. But do note that if you do want to do this, I would recommend at least 4 of them and then trying to find a Who Crates. Who Crates actually buffs them and he doesn't need to be out at any given time. So it's as long as he's in your party, you get the bonus of that. So it's just kind of an easy, cheap way to have a really, really strong team early game. So just make sure you're venturing out at night and collecting those pals as well. Alright, so my next tip is while you're out and about or either exploring dungeons of such, you want to be on the lookout for chests. Now when you do dungeons, there are actually 2 chests after you defeat this boss at the end of the dungeon, and before you teleport out, you have the chance to, obtain those 2 different chests. But what you're looking for in the chests are actually what are blueprints or the schematics. Now these allow you to build items, whether it's weapons or armor or something like that, without having to unlock it in your technology tree. So this is just kind of an easy way to save a few technology points if you don't want to build like certain gear early on and you want to save those points for later in the game. Alright, so my next tip is going to be when you're fighting stronger monsters or pals. Alright, so my next tip is when you're fighting those stronger pals or raid bosses or something like that, you will notice that when they hit your pals, they do an extensive amount of damage. But one of the tricks you can do is actually summon and desummon your pal before and after an attack. So if you get really good at this, you can kind of go to like raid bosses and such and just avoid those heavy attacks so that your pals don't die, and they're just there for you, constantly helping you deal damage. So it takes a little getting used to, but make sure you try this out, and it's really, really helpful later game. Alright, so my last tip for you is to be aware of water. Now, in this game, when you're swimming, you use up your stamina, but what happens when that stamina runs out? Well, it starts taking it out on your health, unfortunately. So, if you're trying to go from island to island, kind of be aware of this because you can take a lot of damage or die. But if you do die, be aware that it will spawn your stuff on the nearest coast from where you died in the water. So, you don't have to run back to the water to pick up your stuff, but you will have to try to figure out which coast it ended up on. Alright, so that's all my beginner-friendly tips and tricks I have for you today. So be on the lookout for my next video that I will hopefully be putting out soon, which is the early game base building, how to level, things like that. Hope everyone was able to at least learn a few things in this video, and if you have any other tips, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Also, if you're not subscribed, hit subscribe button and the like button on the video. It really just helps me out, and I will see you guys in the next one.